In this summary of the Jordan B. Peterson podcast, featuring guest Dr. Gad Saad, professor at Concordia University, the two academics discuss various intellectual themes related to the pursuit of science, the nature of controversy, courage, and their individual experiences. Dr. Saad compares science to the highest form of play, where we attempt to solve puzzles and link the variables of the world together, much like a jigsaw puzzle. The discussion moves to their experiences in academia, and Dr. Peterson acknowledges Dr. Saad's support during the controversial period in his career. Dr. Saad is recognized for his bravery and openness to engage in dialogue, despite the contentious nature of Peterson's views. They then examine the concept of courage in an academic context, expressing that it is a rare virtue, particularly in a society with a tendency to lean towards silence than controversy. They distinguish between those who speak out impulsively and those who carefully consider their words. Dr. Saad is identified as the latter. Dr. Saad compares ideological ideas to parasites, idea pathogens, suggesting that harmful ideologies can affect and change human behavior to their advantage, much like a parasite. He identifies several of these ideologies: postmodernism, social constructivism, biophobia, and cultural relativism, as propagating within university ecosystems. His book traces the origin of these parasitic ideologies and proposes a mind vaccine against them. Dr. Peterson explores the idea of a Darwinian competition among ideas for memorability and communicability, contributing to the distribution of these idea pathogens. He also discusses the connection between left-wing authoritarian views, verbal intelligence, sex, being female, feminine temperament, and specific types of higher education courses. A subthread of the conversation touches on online aggression and how the rise of cyber trolling and crime can be linked to psychopathic and sadistic traits. Drawing from Dawkins' concept of the meme, they discuss how these harmful ideas share a commonality. They seek liberation from the constraints of reality, be it objective truth, biological gender, or innate differences between people. Eventually, the discussion shifts to identifiable predictors of ideological perspectives, and not just based on behavioral aspects, but also morphological traits. For example, a correlation was found between male upper body strength and the likelihood of supporting military interventionism, and stronger men were more likely to take a stand against enforced egalitarianism. They then discussed different forms of dominance hierarchies in animal species, particularly referring to the two types of male orangutans, one physically powerful and dominant, and the other less dominant but more flexible in strategizing mating possibilities. This discussion leads to an exploration of comparative psychology, a field devoted to studying cognition across our animal cousins. This perspective supports the view that human societal interactions can also be analyzed through dominance hierarchies. Dr. Saad questions why Dr. Peterson seems to invite more criticism and hostility than he does. Even though they both often express controversial points of view, Jordan B. Peterson attributes this to his wide range of lectures on YouTube, which delve into diverse topics, and his tendency to prescribe behavior as a clinician, which can alienate some listeners. Dr. Saad agrees, suggesting that Peterson's engagement with religious issues and his motivational messages to young men further amplify controversy among certain groups. Peterson asserts that those who criticize him are often those trying to avoid personal responsibility, dislike traditional ideas, or are male competitors threatened by individuals who have attained success through merit. The discussion then switches to their personal motivations for speaking out and challenging prevalent ideas. Dr. Saad reveals his prioritization of freedom and truth, which leads him to communicate frankly without self-censorship. Dr. Peterson shares his experience studying totalitarianism from an early age and his perception of the power of truth in speech, highlighting how the institutionalized dishonesty shapes totalitarian states. He argues that withholding truth can lead to the worst possible outcomes, thus pushing him to speak out fearlessly. Both speakers express their admiration for immigrants who, having experienced life outside the Western world, are often bolder in defending Western values. They note examples of victimology poker, where one's perceived victim status can be used to excuse controversial statements. They suggest that they themselves, due to their non-Western backgrounds and experiences, are often able to speak more openly on certain topics than their Western counterparts. They also discuss the transformation of the concept of the highest animating principle from an external manifestation of nature's grandiosity to the voice of one's conscience. Peterson uses the biblical figure of the prophet Elijah as an example, pointing to the moment where Elijah chooses to follow a still small voice within him instead of external natural phenomena as a turning point in our understanding of deity and conscience. Dr. Saad acknowledges the power of words and one's conscience in guiding actions and behaviors, but asserts his belief does not need to be anchored in a supernatural cause. He identifies as an evolutionist, recognizing the functional value of religion and morality for humans as social species. He points out that being religious is more of a default state for humans, given our awareness of mortality and the comfort religions provide in confronting this inevitability. Dr. Saad identifies two ways evolutionists study religion: the adaptation approach, which looks at the survival and mating advantages offered by being religious, and the exaptation approach, which sees religion as a byproduct of evolution, piggybacking on neural systems that evolved for other reasons. Peterson subsequently frames Saad from a narrative perspective as someone possessed by the same spirit found within the prophetic tradition of the Old Testament. He uses the story of Jonah, a prophet who initially rejects God's call to prophesy to the people of Nineveh, to illustrate the consequences of refusing to speak one's conscience. In this section of the Jordan B. Peterson podcast, Peterson and guest Dr. Gad Saad discuss a myriad of topics, predominantly focusing on exploring the power and importance of speech and the dangers inherent in silence, their religious and cultural heritages, the pursuit of truth, and the perspectives on religion. Peterson begins to explain his understanding of the story of Jonah. Peterson says he sees it as a metaphor for the necessity of speaking one's truth. Keeping quiet, he warns, can lead to serious dangers for both individuals and societies. Using this allegorical reference, he suggests that rejecting the call to speak can lead to a descent into a personal and societal hell, similar to Jonah's fate in the story. Saad responds by talking about his attachment to his Jewish heritage, even while admitting to not being much of a believer. He shares a personal anecdote about his family's strong emphasis on education and learning. From this, he asserts that the values, ethos, and cultural history he inherited from his Jewish lineage are more important to him than dogmatic religious rituals or beliefs. Peterson then introduces a scientific perspective, talking about the importance of firm foundational genes in DNA repair mechanisms and the variability in less important genes. This relationship, Peterson argues, is similar to how we regard deep, foundational truths and tolerate or enjoy more peripheral or variable ones. He suggests Saad's indifference to certain religious rituals aligns with this concept. In response, Saad draws on his background in mathematics to illustrate his pursuit of truth. He mentions the nomological networks of cumulative evidence concept he discussed in his book, The Parasitic Mind, and posits that he can pursue universal truths without needing a supernatural higher authority. He mentions the ambivalence he holds toward religion, largely influenced by his experiences growing up in Lebanon, where religious hatred forced his family to flee. The conversation switches to a critique of the US versus them mentality inherent in many religious faiths, according to Saad. He cites the dangers of religious divisiveness as evidenced by the civil war in his native Lebanon, viewing it not as a misuse of benign religious narratives, but as direct consequences of these narratives. Dr. Saad points out the contradictions found in religious beliefs and practices. Dr. Peterson responds by explaining the concept of nomological networks, highlighting that what is considered real is often determined by the convergence of multiple independent sensory experiences. He draws from Jungian analytical psychology, highlighting that this is akin to building a network of cross-cultural mythological analysis, which underlines a fundamental human narrative of confronting fear and opposition courageously, embodied in the hero myth. Next, Dr. Saad reaffirms this view, illustrating how certain universal archetypes, such as the male hero in romance novels, echo across culture and time. He likewise introduces his forthcoming book on happiness, acknowledging that research shows a moderate correlation between religiosity and happiness. Yet he also asserts that happiness can be achieved in multiple non-religious ways. The conversation then turns towards the role of play in human life, with both speakers agreeing that playful engagement is key to deep happiness, scientific discovery, and strong relationships. Dr. Peterson further underpins play's important role in diffusing tyranny, since it signals mastery in one's domain of exploration. Employing Aristotle's concept of the golden mean, Dr. Saad opts for striking a balance in life. He argues that too much of something or too little of it can disrupt the balance, which subsequently erodes happiness. He also delves into regret theory, pointing out that regrets of inaction often pose a greater psychological threat than regrets of action. The discussion was a mix of zealous authenticity, Twitter influences, their respective relationships with their wives, humor as a tool in their interactions, Dr. Saad's upcoming book about happiness, and social media engagement, among other topics. Dr. Gad Saad expressed his determination to never hold back from defending the truth. He stated, "I would be regretful if I did that, if I held my tongue and did not weigh in on Twitter to some inane BS that someone then I would be very regretful, and therefore I live a life some might argue of obsessive authenticity." He believes that his authenticity is what brings him happiness and confidence. Peterson then asked Dr. Saad how he manages to keep his outspoken and charismatic personality from turning egotistical. To this, Dr. Saad pointed out his continuous struggle with this conundrum, especially when his personal and professional values conflict. He exemplified the struggle by narrating an instance where he felt compelled to correct a friend publicly on Twitter, a choice that soured their relationship. However, he argued that his internal struggle is itself a demonstration of humility. Discussing spouses, Dr. Saad emphasized the crucial role of a significant other in identifying one's behavioral traps and helping them be a better person. Offering a glance into his own marriage, Peterson revealed how the spirit of play saved his relationship during a difficult period. Also, Peterson shared an interesting revelation he got from Ben Shapiro, that Eve means beneficial adversary, which perfectly defines an optimal partner in play. Dr. Saad also shared his motivation for writing a book on happiness. He emphasized that while genetics accounts for about 50% of a person's happiness quotient, the other 50% can be shaped by our choices and mindset. Peterson further suggested that maintaining a sense of humor and playfulness through all interactions might be one of the reasons why Dr. Saad has not been excessively criticized. In conclusion, Peterson wished Dr. Saad luck with the successful launch of his upcoming book, while expressing hopes to meet him in Montreal. The conversation ended on a light note, with the two deciding to discuss more personal issues behind the paywall on the Daily Wire Plus side. Check out the full podcast by clicking the link in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for listening to this podcast summary episode of the Pod Slice.